to the surface of Superbike Planet.
The SuperbikePlanet.com podcast, Soupkast, is brought to you by American Honda.
Hello and welcome to Soupkast by Honda. This is Soupkast by Honda 126 for March 11th, 2011. Author Kevin Cameron joins us. Kevin, welcome to Soupkast. So Kevin, I've told you privately how much time I spent reading your book, Top Dead Center, this off-season. You and I discussed that it's been a very snowy winter in Minnesota, so when I'm exhausted from shoveling 36 inches of snow off the roof of my house, I would relax with your book. And there's such great stories in there. I know you're always struggling with your identity, so I'm just wondering, after reading that book, maybe you just want to be a travel writer. Have you ever thought about that?
Travel writer, that'd be something. Well, first thing is, in 1972, I went to Imola, and we got nowhere. Our bike was out after a short distance, and that was the race that Small Parts won on the Ducati. That made Ducati. So it was exciting to be there. But when I got home and I told my dad where I'd been, he said, "You idiot, you asshole. You were within 15 miles of where Caesar crossed the Rubicon, and you didn't go see it?" Well, I'm just a Philistine, I guess. And so, as a Philistine, I couldn't be a travel writer. Oh, the racer is tourist, that thing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
78, I think it was. Went to visit Morbidelli, went traveling around Italy up to Switzerland. Schlachter wanted to see the Alps. He thought he would never get to Europe again. Ha. And one of the things on that trip was that we're on the top of this mountain. We'd ridden some swaying cable car up there, and there are all these sailplanes zooming back and forth across the top of this mountain. Those things are loud. They make a loud roaring noise.
Really?
And I asked an aerodynamicist about that, and he said, well, that's one aspect of aircraft noise that really has not been adequately studied, because the engines make so much noise that the rest of it is neglected.
And did you have serious customs problems on that trip?
Well, in 76, Cliff Carr, the late Cliff Carr, offered me a ride back to England, because he had a tow vehicle and a caravan, as the English call them. So I loaded up my bike and we went off, and we get to the Channel Ferry and get to the other side in the English customs. I breezed through because I had a carnet de passage, which had come by Federal Express from wherever those things came from in those days, and it was just like magic. It basically says, this guy's okay, his stuff is okay, and if there's anything about it that's not okay, we'll indemnify it. But Clifford, they basically did everything but handcuff the guy. When he wanted to go have a pee, they sent an officer with him as if he was going to try to escape down the toilet. And finally, he thought to himself, wait a minute, isn't there there's a provision in the law. If I've spent 6 months or more out of the country in the last 12 months, I'm entitled to an exception. And the moment that he uttered those words to the customs officers, they began to call him Mr. Carr.
Only a rider. That's a rider trait, to remember something obscure or have an obscure last-second save like that.
I think you're right. Yeah, those guys they're desperation trained.
They are, absolutely. So you were with Irv Kanemoto, or what was the situation there?
Oh, well, there was a time when first of all, there was a story that he told about traveling across England from one race to another, and the fuel pump on their transporter quit. And fortunately, it was a gasoline burner and not a diesel, because they were able to take the motorcycle gas tank, and he had the gas tank on his knee in the passenger seat, which is on the left. And they had a fuel line running from one of the petcock You know, it was a triple petcock, so he had a line from one to the other, and then a third line going to the engine. And they'd drive as far as they could go on what was it, 6.2 gallons, 24 liters. And then they'd have to stop and bring a jerry can and refill that thing. But it was on one of those trips that he said to me, "Now, Kevin, I have to tell you that the reason that you'll never amount to anything in this sport is that you not only want to know how, which is usually not possible, but you also want to know why, which is a waste of time."
Why is a waste of time? Okay.
Well, you know, racing,
Yeah,
you
sure.
don't have any time.
Right.
And what we're finding here at the Speedway today is there's Eric Bostrom struggling with this brand new ZX-10R, and the chassis acts like it's too stiff, so they soften it up. Then it acts like it's too soft. So it's like the story of the guy trying to measure the volume of a plastic gas tank in bright sunlight.
I used to say that I was happy that I saw Europe before everyone had a cell phone. I used to say that. Now I say I'm happy I saw America before everyone had a cell phone. Anyway, what was Europe like in the mid-'70s, the race scene, etc.?
I remember sitting in a little trailer at Monza, and one of these Europeans was giving me a little lecture. He said, "You look around and you see many beautiful things, is it not so?" And I said, "It is so." And he said, "This is a scene of tremendous romance. There are the heroes and their wonderful machines." But he said, "I must say to you that there is no one who will leave the racetrack with more money than he came with." So it was a very different scene from, say, American sprint cars or the Grand Prix racing of the 50s, when a man with a Norton who had blown up in practice would bring his bike to the starting line with a rag tied around the small end of the rod and his engine all built up so it looked perfectly good, push off the grid because he had to have the starting money. Mm-hmm. So, and then there was the hotel in France. I'm on my way to my room. I can't get there because it's pitch dark in the hallway. Somebody takes pity on me, presses a button on the wall. "Oh, thank you." I start down the hall, the lights go out. So I go back and press the button again, and I go faster. Well, I don't get all the way to my room. And finally I realize lights will go off in 15 seconds. This is an economy measure because Europe is still recovering from the war.
Yes.
And, of course, now that Europe has recovered from the war and have retooled with all the latest stuff, once again, Europe is our big competitor. And lots of patents are coming from there. It's a very different deal. Forging ahead.
Yes, they are certainly clawing ahead.
There's been some big changes there. It used to be that when a person went racing in Europe, the rider was the center of the team. There were no factory teams other than MV. And the rider might have what the Germans call Hilfe, a helper. Mm. And this seemed to be a person who only possessed one pair of pants and who slept among the gas cans in the transporter while the rider and his family slept in the trailer. And so when Schlachter and I showed up at Krauser's place in 81 after the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim, it was to Richard that Herr Krauser turned and he said, "What do you want?" Because he had invited us there. He said, "Come and we'll discuss things." Well, of course, we were very excited about that because the notion that there might be anything approaching a meritocracy in racing was just intoxicating. So there we are, and Richard wanted so many things from racing. He wanted, and we needed so much. You know, we're sitting on our haunches working on these bikes. Krauser later told us that it was demeaning and undignified. But so he's sort of looking at Richard, and he said, "What do you want?" And Richard is sort of sputtering away, and there I am, the Hilfer, and I finally said, "Our direct costs are $2,200 a race." And Krauser looked at me and he said, "Agreed. To be paid as follows." And then he rattled off this. His agent would meet us in Holland, and we'd be paid such and such an amount in a certain currency. Again, in Italy, we would meet with his representative, and it was terribly civilized and absolutely a surprise. But then it's really the European way, you know, on that classic record about the young man making it in the music business. "Come on over here, boy. Gonna make you a star."
You mentioned Morbidelli.
Yeah.
And you were quite a Morbidelli fan for a while, an enthusiast.
Well, what happened with Morby was, through the 1960s, Japan had been the absolute star of two-wheel motor racing. And Europe, with the exception of MV, was like the headlights on your car after they've been powered by the battery for about 6 hours. And so for a European manufacturer to show signs of life, and not only that, but signs of innovation, was wonderful. And Jorg Muller, I think, is Dutch, and he was part of that wonderful 50cc tradition in post-war Europe, in which a variety of tuners began building very fast Rennes florets, little tiny 50cc things, and they became more and more sophisticated, and they learned about porting and about exhaust pipe design. And these little engines, you could prepare a new cylinder in a few hours. You could do a lot of experiments in a short time. So these people, all of whom had day jobs, became sophisticated amateur two-stroke engineers. And Muller got hired at Morbidelli, and Jan Thiel, who's now retired, was like the cathedral builders of Europe, who went from place to place saying, "I have the ability to design and construct the building you want." And so Jan Thiel went to Bultaco. From Bultaco, he went to Aprilia. I think he retired from Aprilia. And he was a man with a day job who ran little tiny two-strokes on a dynamometer in the dark of night. And those people won a Grand Prix race from Suzuki with the motorcycle that they had built themselves. So I thought that was pretty outstanding. Anyway, Muller was part of that tradition. And when I had the opportunity to talk to him in the Morby factory, he said, "With four strokes, it is only money. Ideas are no longer of any importance because they've all been thought of." Well, of course, that turns out not to be literally true, but what was certainly true was that two-stroke improvements were a matter of innovation at that time. Finally, two-strokes got to the point where they could make the same cylinder pressure as a four-stroke, but do it every time the piston came to top dead center. They didn't have the wasted suck and blow cycles. And Morbidelli had their moment in the 15 minutes of fame that Andy Warhol spoke of, and then they were no more.
You told me a charming story once. Was it at Bridgehampton the first time you saw a Morby? Was it at Bridgehampton or somewhere?
That was a production bike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the first one you
What,
saw.
what they
wasn't it?
called an MBA. And I actually can't remember whether... I sort of thought that I talked to Muller first, and I saw an MBA later. And I had an opportunity to measure it and handle all the parts.
Yeah, you popped the case and had a look at it and were impressed with what you saw, not just the engineering, but the quality of the parts, etc., right? After having your face in a million TZs.
Well, you get spoiled by a Yamaha production racer because generally everything is good. It's not that there isn't now and then a part that you'd set aside. You wouldn't throw it away because you never know when parts will be short. But with, for example, the Aprilia that Al Salaveria rode, that was a kit. It wasn't a motorcycle. And basically, why did they even bother assembling it? To make sure they had all the parts. The two pistons didn't come to top center together. Had to make offset keys for that. Fortunately, I didn't have to make them. But there was a lot of hand craftsmanship required to make that motorcycle as good as it was supposed to be. And that particular Aprilia 250s never caught on in the U.S. except in go-kart racing as the Rotax, the basic Rotax design. But a very powerful thing. And when the 125 Aprilias that have been so dominant in 125 GPs, they're a lovely thing. They have a single disc valve behind the cylinder. All the other disc valve engines have pretty much been side loaders. But in order to get symmetrical distribution is the sort of French term for distribution, for intake. They had these skew gears driving the disc behind the cylinder. And I don't think stuff has changed all that much in the last 10 or 12 years. I think there's basically the single oval exhaust port with two little boosters, or there's a central divider, a T-shaped port as far as the exhaust, and then the rest of the cylinders transfer ports all the way around with dividers between them that are typically a millimeter wide. And those engines are speed limited by the length of time it takes to blow the charge from the crankcase into the cylinder. And in the early days, they thought that had to be done by the crankcase, so they made the rod as a very narrow thing that almost touched the two flywheels between which it worked. Everything very tightly fitted. There were stuffers with little fingers that poked up into the bottom of the piston when it came down at bottom center. But as Japanese engine development proceeded, they found that the smaller the crankcase, the less air you can suck out of it with the exhaust pipe. So when the exhaust pipe took over a lot of the pumping task, they started making the crankcase bigger again. So even today there are people who look in a two-stroke crankcase and they say, wow, we got to epoxy a lot of cork in all these holes here. And some people still do that. And then they take it back out again.
I know you're not much for nostalgia, and I know you're not much for moto romanticism at all, but the passing of the two-stroke, we're probably seeing this in our lives. What happened? I thought that we were going to have two-stroke cars and direct injection and whatnot.
Well, we're going to have direct injection, and we're going to have two-stroke diesels forever and ever. That when those big motor ships that deliver all those containers, chances are those things are powered by an enormous direct drive two-stroke diesel turning between 60 and 80 RPM. and it has valves in the head, and it has valves in the cylinder wall, or ports in the cylinder wall, and has an external blower, so the crankcase is not used as a pump. But as far as racing two-strokes, how long could you stand to be on a honeymoon?
Wow, that's that's a dangerous question, knowing that my wife listens to these podcasts occasionally. Let me think. In the right scene, in the right set of circumstances, I could be there for a while.
Well, yes. But the thing is that by its nature, a honeymoon is a time-limited phenomenon. Because after a while, either to him or to her, it's going to occur that the toilet seat has been left up or down, that there are foreign bodies in the sink that shouldn't be there, and that the other person has a variety of really annoying habits. And that's what tells you that now you have to move on towards other parts of your plan. And I think that the two-stroke was a glorious honeymoon. It was a moment of creation. Then there was a time of realization that there might be no limit to how far this thing could go. First they took the 50cc title, then the 125, then the 250. Then in the early 70s, the 350 and then the 500 went, and finally sidecar. It was 100% two-stroke. And how the four-stroke people hated it. But there was no alternative to it. They'd made a rule which they thought was very liberal, because two-strokes were these feeble, smoking pieces of junk. And they thought, well, some people the least among ye shall be king. So just in case, we'll let them run their stinking two-strokes. Weren't they sorry then? So I'm satisfied with that. I think that it was wonderful that the two-stroke came, that it offered an opportunity to, not an opportunity, it brought with it a mandate to improve chassis, suspension, and tires. And when 500 and 750 two-strokes were done transforming the motorcycle, then and only then were we ready for lightweight four-strokes to move into the house that the two-stroke built. Because in 72, when Kawasaki and Suzuki brought those 100 horsepower, uncivilized, POS monstrosities to Daytona, there were no tires that would stay on them. And so a deserving young man on a Yamaha 350 Twin won the race. And the tire companies just sort of staggered back. Tony Mills at Dunlop designed that big circular cross-section speedway tire that Agostini won the 200 on in 74. And at the end of 73, at Kawasaki, we were testing tires that looked like what is on the 600s out here at the speedway today. Slicks with Arabic writing on them. And those tires were so soft, Goodyear, if left to themselves, would have made the tires out of rubberized raincoat material with a few coats of rubber cement on the outside for tread. You could turn those things inside out practically. I saw the Pirelli guy do it once. Really? But the slick revolution took place in 1974. When we went to Kel at Daytona in 74 and said, hey, what's with these slick tires? I mean, are they good, or what's going on? Kel just said, oh, well, something Goodyear's playing with, you know. We have to run whatever they give us, we have to run it. And we thought, oh, yeah, geez, poor Kel. And we went back to our Dunlop triangulars. And then we got to Loudon and we thought, shit, he put it over on us. Look, his bikes are 3/4 of a second quicker than ours. So we all went and got slicks, and suddenly we discovered that, you know, there was nothing in the old tire technology. Just put it in the trash. It's been slicks ever since. And so the two-strokes made that happen. Those three-cylinder Triumphs and CB750 based Honda racers, they were fine on the old hard tires. They just sort of putted around the track, 157 miles an hour, bang, pop, chuff. And then the two-strokes came, a bunch of buzz saws, and just cut those tires to pieces. And the same thing, there was the long travel suspension revolution that started in 74 and was over by 76. Everybody had to do it because if you increase the travel, you can absorb the same amount of energy with less spring and less damping. And the less you oppose the motion of the tire, the more intimately it can conform to the track surface. So you have more grip. And you have somebody like Mike Baldwin saying, wow, I don't have to make my upshift at the pavement transition in turn 5, which used to be where you went out on the banking here. Mm-hmm. He said, I can just gas it through there because I know it's not going to kick me sideways. And so that was the second revolution. The third revolution was the Cobas twin beam aluminum chassis. And that sort of evolved out of the steel tubes. Yamaha started to make a thing that looked like a Cobas chassis with the down tube under the engine. The down tube kept getting shorter every year, and finally it was gone. And then in the late 80s, I think Honda began to make a few street bikes with the aluminum twin beam chassis, and the world has really never looked back. And as to the question of whether Ducati's trellis frame was really every bit as good, hogwash. Because if you remember, at the midpoint, or about the two-thirds point of the 1,000cc twins part of Superbike, there was a thing that everyone called Ducati wallow. The rider would get on the gas and the bike would just do this sort of wallowing motion. And I asked Colin about that, and he said, yeah, they wallow, but he said they dig in. And what was happening was that to get the flexibility for the chassis to act like a suspension when the bike is leaned over, they had to make the frame pretty floppy. And finally it got so floppy that Stoner said, that thing, with those steel tube frames, you can't hit the same point on the track twice, 2 laps running, because it's just wobbling all over the place. So Ducati switched to this carbon fiber thing, which isn't working real well yet, but then neither is the new Boeing 787, which is carbon fiber. It takes a while to learn a new material. I'm sure that a novelist who's written in English is not going to become a top seller in Urdu overnight.
So on a personal level, last fall you stated in an email that you were going to try and clean the shop out over the winter. And I replied that I, too, was going to try and clean my garage over the winter. I'm wondering, how much progress, my friend, did you make?
I managed to get the snow off the roof before it fell in.
Before it fell in. That was a bit of a necessity, I assume.
Yeah. The front part has got double rafters, but the rear part is... You go in the bottom of it, and it looks like there's something heavy up there. Mm-hmm. You can see it bend. But I've got these 3 airplane engines in there, and I'm de-emphasizing the airplane engines. They're too big for me. And so I got one sold. One of them is basically rusted junk. I don't know what I'll do with that. But the shop is really not where it's at for me at the moment, because I'm doing this 50 engines book, and there's a lot of research involved, and sometimes it's interesting.
We'll get onto that for a second, but do you have a B29 engine, or what is in the shop? Is it
I did a bunch of studying on the engines on the B29, which was the R3350 was made by Wright Aeronautical, and it had a lot of serious problems. And it was a tricky engine to work with. And when I encountered a man who was a B-29 flight engineer in the Korean War, B-29s were used extensively there, he said, I'm particularly proud of the fact that I never had an engine stop before I switched it off. And I said, "That is indeed a distinction. How did you do that?" He said, "I never took my eyes off that panel." Because to keep on top of a complicated system, like a petroleum processing plant or a nuclear power plant or a large piston engine, you have to be looking at several variables at once, and you have to have an understanding of the behavior patterns of those variables. It isn't as simple as, oh, this needle's in the red, run for the hills. It's sort of, what pattern of behaviors are you seeing and what does it imply? Gas turbines now are just wonderful. They're like fuel injection as compared with carburetors on automobiles. You hit run, and the engine goes into its start sequence, and it starts up and runs. Not that they're perfect, but better.
So you didn't get the shop cleaned out, is what you're saying.
That is what I'm saying. The best intentions.
We're here at Daytona. Supposedly foot traffic outside at the display tents is up this year, and traffic downtown among the real enthusiasts is also supposed to be strong. But what do you think of the racing? You're here at Daytona. You didn't come last year, so...
Well, I'm involved in trying to understand what's going on with this Cycle World Attack Kawasaki ZX-10R program, and getting a look from the inside is an opportunity a person wouldn't turn down. I'm a little shy. I think Richard Stanboli is a good team owner in that everyone is scared of him.
I was going to say afraid of him,
but he's smiling secretly the whole time, like the radio broadcaster who, not knowing the mic was still on, said, "There, that ought to hold the little bastards."
Yes.
So Richard has a sense of humor, and I can see it at work a lot of the time. And he's made so many parts. I mean, he has a business that makes all kinds of specialties for motorcycles, and so he's paying his own way. Kawasaki's paying their way. And Cycle World's role is Matthew Miles in his address book. He knows, apparently, every person with either a vested interest or an interest in motorcycling in the world.
I wouldn't doubt that.
And we walked down the main drag at Valencia with the big transporters on one side and the hospitalities on the other, and he seemed like he knew every other person. And of course, Matthew is a hard-working, painfully honest Midwestern guy, and makes me think of Phil Schilling that way. Anyway, people recognize that sort of painful honesty, and I think they sort of say, "Well, could you use 200,000?"
Could I?
So putting this all together has sort of made him feel a kind of awe, that you can make these motions with your hands like the wizard, and actual cash appears. Huge tractor-trailer transporters move across the country at highway speed, and somebody says, "Oh yeah, I've got some '09 cylinder heads already built. We could run 600s. No problem." Because Matthew's the kind of guy who's worried about paying for his daughter's books when she gets to college. He's got a little fund where he's saving money, he's putting something away for a rainy day, and here he finds that if you talk sweet and right, that it rains, but it's money that's falling. Because companies are looking for opportunities to get their brand out there. And if you offer them an opportunity, they might take it. So I think it's made him feel a kind of humility. That you can wield this, and that something real comes out of it. That you're no longer just an enthusiast thinking, "Oh gosh, wouldn't it be great if they'd let us stand sort of near those bikes.
And what about a broader scale, the DMG series?
Oh, I think what happens. Right now they've got their team apology that walks around the pits, being earnest with everyone, and they've got that operations guy that seems to be really a crackerjack character. So things seem to run smoothly. But I think what's happened is that the original decisions that created DMG offended a lot of traditional enthusiast fans. And the sleight of hand that was supposed to cause millions of baseball fans to give over their lifelong yearning for the big leagues to come to motor racing, I don't think any of those guys came. So that left them kind of in the middle.
Yep.
And they're going to be in the middle until they can show the public any reason to do otherwise. And I wish them every success. But, if winter's approaching and you have the idea that the way to get warm is to burn your house down, you're going to have limited sympathy for that viewpoint. And if they say, well, could you chip in for a lumber fund? We don't have any place to live. You got to think about it. So I wish them well. I have no idea whether they'll succeed.
Well, we've got a superbike race, but I want to thank you for joining me here. And also I want to confess that I didn't clean my garage either, and I don't feel bad about it now after speaking with you.
Soupkast is brought to you by American Honda.